I still remember the smell of that charity camp. Stale bread, damp wool blankets, and the sharp bite of winter air that cut through the holes in my jacket. I'd been standing in that food line for what felt like hours, my stomach hollow, my pride even more so. Around me, dozens of people shuffled forward with their heads down, just like mine. We were the invisible ones. The forgotten? I'd gotten good at blending in, at making myself small, at pretending I didn't exist. But then everything stopped. A black town car pulled up outside the camp gates. I didn't look up at first. Rich people sometimes came to these places, handing out turkeys at Thanksgiving or writing checks for tax deductions. They'd smile for photos and leave before the sun set. But this time was different. I heard expensive shoes on gravel, confident steps that suddenly faltered. Then silence. The kind of silence that makes your skin prickle, Susan. The voice was old, shaking, disbelieving. I knew that voice. God, I knew it, like I knew my own heartbeat. My hands gripped the edges of my torn coat, and I wanted to disappear into the ground. I wanted the earth to swallow me whole. Because when I finally forced myself to look up, I saw him. My grandfather, Victor Ashford. Silver hair, perfectly styled, a cashmere coat that probably cost more than most people here made in 6 months, and his face had gone completely white. His security guard reached for him, worried he might collapse. Other people in line started whispering, but my grandfather just stood there, staring at me like he'd seen a ghost. His lips moved, forming my name again, but no sound came out. I saw his eyes travel from my face to my dirt-stained hands to the shoes with soles so thin I could feel every pebble beneath my feet. This wasn't how Victor Ashford's granddaughter was supposed to look. This wasn't who I was supposed to be. It's me, I whispered, and I hated how small my voice sounded. How defeated, but to understand why that moment shattered us both. You need to know who I used to be. You need to know about the life I had before everything went dark. My name is Susan Ashford, and I grew up in a world most people only see in magazines. My father, Marcus Ashford, was a decorated Army colonel. Strong, principled, the kind of man who commanded respect just by walking into a room. My mother, Alina, was graceful and kind, always smelling of jasmine perfume. We lived in a sprawling estate on the edge of the city, the kind with an iron gate and a circular driveway. My grandfather owned a chain of manufacturing plants and real estate across 3 states. My grandmother collected art and hosted charity galas where senators and businessmen would toast to their success. I had a brother, Daniel, 3 years older than me. Growing up, he was my hero. He taught me to ride a bike, helped me with homework, scared away the boys who tried to tease me in middle school. We were close, or at least, I thought we were. Everything changed the day my father died. I was 17. Daniel was 20. Dad's unit was ambushed overseas. They sent him home in a flag-draped coffin, and our entire world collapsed. I remember my mother's screams when the officers came to the door. I remember my grandmother clutching her pearls so tightly her knuckles turned white. I remember my grandfather's jaw clenching, that frightening military discipline he'd passed down to my father kicking in even as his heart broke. But most of all, I remember Daniel. He cried louder than anyone at the funeral. Sobbed against the casket. People patted his back, whispered about how hard this must be for him, the eldest son, the one who'd have to be strong now. Everyone looked at Daniel with sympathy, with understanding. He played the grieving son so perfectly that no one noticed the way he watched me across the cemetery. No one saw the calculation in his eyes when the lawyer mentioned the will. No one understood what I was too young and too heartbroken to see. My father had left me a trust fund, $2 million, to be held until I turned 25. It was his way of making sure I'd always be taken care of, no matter what happened to him. Daniel got the family business connections, the network, the legacy. I got financial security. At the time, it seemed fair. It seemed like love. After the funeral, Daniel hugged me tight, told me we'd get through this together, told me he'd always protect me, and I believed him. God help me, I believed every word. I didn't know then that the person who held me while I cried, who promised to keep me safe, was the same person who would spend the next 8 years systematically destroying my life. I didn't know that his tears weren't for our father. They were for himself. For what he thought he deserved and didn't get. The first hint came 3 months after Dad died. My mother had started drinking, not heavily at first, just wine with dinner, that turned into wine before dinner, then wine instead of dinner. My grandparents tried to help, but she'd shut them out. She'd shut everyone out except Daniel. He was there constantly, taking care of things, he said, managing affairs, helping Mom cope. I was grateful. I was so grateful I didn't ask questions. Not even when Mom started signing papers Daniel brought home. Not even when her eyes grew more distant and her words started slurring by noon. I was 18 when my mother died. The doctors called it cirrhosis, acute liver failure. It had progressed faster than anyone expected. I held her hand in the hospital while machines beeped around us. And with her last breaths, she whispered, "I'm sorry, baby. I'm so sorry." I didn't understand what she was apologizing for. Not then. Daniel arranged the funeral. Another beautiful, sad ceremony. More tears. More people telling me how lucky I was to have such a devoted brother. And through it all, Daniel's hand never left my shoulder. Protective, possessive. I couldn't tell the difference anymore. After Mom died, I moved in with my grandparents. The estate felt different now, quieter, haunted by all the people we'd lost. My grandmother tried her best, making my favorite meals, asking about school, but grief had aged her overnight. My grandfather threw himself into work, spending longer hours at the office, as if staying busy could outrun the pain. And Daniel visited every single day. Everyone marveled at what a good brother he was. How devoted, how caring. He'd show up with groceries for our grandparents, help around the house, sit with me while I did homework. "You're not alone, Susan," he'd say, squeezing my shoulder. "We're family. We take care of each other." And in front of everyone, that's exactly what it looked like. Daniel, the devoted grandson. Daniel, the protective older brother. Daniel Hood stepped up when tragedy struck. But the moment we were alone, his mask would slip. Not all at once. Never obvious enough that I could point to something concrete and say, "This is wrong." It was subtle. A comment here. A look there. He'd walk into my room without knocking, stand in the doorway watching me with an expression I couldn't read. When I'd ask him to leave, he'd smile and say, "This is my house too, Susan. Don't be so sensitive." If I talked about friends or school activities, he'd find reasons why I shouldn't go. "Those people don't really care about you. I'm the only one who understands what you've been through." If I mentioned missing Mom or Dad, his jaw would tighten and he'd change the subject so fast it made my head spin. I started to feel like I was walking on eggshells in my own home, always watching what I said, always aware of where Daniel was and what kind of mood he might be in, but I told myself I was being paranoid. That grief was making me see things that weren't there. That Daniel was just overprotective because we'd lost so much. I made excuses for him because the alternative was too terrifying. The alternative meant I was truly alone. The day everything crystallized was my 19th birthday. My grandfather called us both into his study, the one with the leather chairs and the massive oak desk where he'd built his empire. He looked older that day, more tired than I'd ever seen him. He poured himself a whiskey and told us he'd been thinking about our futures, about making sure we'd be taken care of no matter what happened to him. "I've established a trust fund," he said, sliding 2 folders across the desk. $2 million? $1 million for each of you, to be released when you turn 25. I was stunned, grateful, overwhelmed. I thanked him, tears in my eyes, thinking about how this meant security. How this meant I could go to college, build a life, honor my father's memory by making something of myself. But when I looked at Daniel, expecting to see similar gratitude or relief, what I saw instead made my blood run cold. His smile was perfect. His thank you was gracious, but his eyes were flat and dark, calculating something I couldn't understand. And when grandfather hugged us both and left the room to let us celebrate, Daniel's smile vanished completely. $1 million each, he said softly, staring at the folder in his hands. Equal shares. "Daniel, this is amazing," I said, trying to recapture the moment, to make it what it should have been. "Grandfather is so generous. We're so lucky." "Lucky," he repeated the word, like it tasted bitter. "You think you're lucky, Susan? We both are. This is Dad loved you more." The words came out flat, emotionless. Everyone knows it. He was harder on me, expected more, but you could do no wrong. His precious little girl. I felt like I'd been slapped. "Daniel, that's not true. Dad loved us both, and now grandfather gives us equal amounts." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Like we're the same. Like we deserve the same. We're both his grandchildren. Why wouldn't we? Because I'm the one who's been here." His voice rose suddenly, and I actually flinched. "I'm the one taking care of things. Managing the properties, learning the business. You're just going to college to play around for 4 years while I do the real work? But sure, Susan, equal shares. That makes perfect sense." He left before I could respond, the folder crushed in his fist. I stood in that study shaking, trying to understand what had just happened. Trying to reconcile the brother who hugged me at funerals with the man who'd just looked at me like I'd stolen something that belonged to him. That was the beginning. Or maybe it had always been there and I was just finally seeing it. My mother remarried 8 months later. She'd been dating Richard, a businessman from 2 states over, and apparently they'd fallen in love. The wedding was small, quick. She seemed happy in a desperate, frantic kind of way, like she was running from ghosts and thought a new husband in a new city might finally let her escape. She called me the week before the ceremony. "I need a fresh start, baby," she said, and I could hear the tears in her voice. "This house, this city, it's all death and memories. Richard's good to me. He has kids of his own. We're going to blend our families. Start over. You understand, don't you? What I understood was that she was leaving. That she'd rather build a life with strangers than stay and heal with the children she'd already had. But I was 19 and I didn't know how to say any of that, so I just said, "I'm happy for you, Mom." She moved across the country. Calls became sporadic. Birthday cards sometimes arrived late, sometimes not at all. She got busy with her new life, her new stepchildren, her new husband who didn't remind her of everything she'd lost. And just like that, I went from having parents to being an orphan with a living mother. Daniel changed after that, or maybe he just stopped pretending. He became sweeter, more attentive. He'd take me out for coffee, ask about my classes, offer to help with anything I needed. He bought me gifts, fancy ones that seemed too expensive, too much. When I'd protest, he'd smile and say, "You're my baby sister, Susan. Let me take care of you." He introduced me to his friends, successful people in their 20s and 30s, and he'd always have his arm around me when he did. "This is Susan," he'd say with pride. "Isn't she beautiful? So smart. I'm so lucky to have her." People would coo about what a close relationship we had. What a wonderful brother. I should have been grateful. I should have felt loved. Instead, I felt trapped. Because that kindness came with strings I couldn't see but could definitely feel. He wanted to know where I was going, who I was with, what time I'd be home. If I made plans without telling him first, he'd get this look, this disappointed hurt expression, and say I thought we told each other everything. "Susan, I thought we were close." He'd show up at my campus unannounced, sit in on study groups, offer rides to friends in a way that felt helpful but made my classmates uncomfortable. One guy I'd been talking to, someone sweet from my English class, asked me out for coffee. The next day, Daniel had somehow found out and showed up at the cafe, sat with us, dominated the conversation, made subtle jokes about how naive I was, how I needed protecting. That guy never asked me out again. "I'm just looking out for you," Daniel said when I confronted him. "College boys only want one thing, Susan. Someone has to protect you since Dad's not here to do it." I wanted to scream that I didn't need protecting, that I needed space, freedom, the chance to make my own mistakes and live my own life. But every time I tried to pull away, he'd do something thoughtful, send flowers, leave my favorite coffee on my desk, write me long messages about how important family was, how we only had each other now, and I'd feel guilty for doubting him, for seeing manipulation where maybe there was just love. I graduated college with honors, 22 years old, a degree in literature, and absolutely no idea what to do next. I'd applied to graduate programs, dreamed about maybe teaching or writing, building something that was mine. But the day after graduation, Daniel sat me down at our grandparents' dining table and folded his hands like he was about to deliver news. He'd thought very carefully about Susan. "We need to talk about your future." Our grandparents were traveling, visiting family in Europe, so it was just us in that big, empty house. I remember the late afternoon light coming through the windows, casting long shadows across the Persian rug. I remember thinking how quiet everything was, how isolated. "I've been thinking about grad school," I started, but Daniel held up his hand. "That's what I want to discuss. Look, I know you have these ideas about continuing your education, but that's not really practical for someone in your position." "My position? You're a young woman from a prominent family. Susan, girls in our family, they don't pursue these lengthy academic careers. They focus on what matters: family, stability, building a proper life." He said it so smoothly, so reasonably, like this was just common sense, everyone understood. "But I want to. What you want isn't always what's best." His tone was gentle but firm. The way you'd talk to a child asking for something dangerous. "You're about to turn 25 soon. The trust fund will be released. You'll have significant wealth, and that makes you vulnerable. You need protection. You need someone to manage things properly." "I can manage my own, Susan." He reached across the table and took my hand, and his grip was just a little too tight. "I've taken care of you since Dad died. Since Mom left, I know what's best. And what's best right now is for you to get married. I've already found someone perfect." The room tilted. "You've what?" "His name is Marcus Chen. Successful businessman, well-connected, from a good family. I've known him for years through my business dealings. He's stable, financially secure, and he's willing to take on the responsibility of a wife who comes with considerable assets." "Daniel, I don't even know this person." "You'll meet him. You'll like him. And more importantly, this marriage will protect you and your inheritance. Trust me, Susan. Have I ever steered you wrong?" I wanted to say yes. "Yes, you've steered me wrong every single day since Dad died." But the words wouldn't come because I'd spent so many years learning not to contradict him. Learning that disagreeing meant tension, meant manipulation, meant Daniel's disappointment, which somehow always became my fault. So instead, I just sat there, frozen. While my brother planned my entire life in the span of a conversation, the wedding happened 20 days later. 20 days. That's all the time I had between learning I was getting married and walking down an aisle to a man I'd met exactly 3 times. The meetings were always supervised, always brief. Marcus was handsome in a cold, sharp way, older than me by 15 years. He smiled when he was supposed to smile and said all the right things, but his eyes never quite reached me. He looked at me the way someone might look at a painting they were considering purchasing, assessing value, checking for flaws. Do you love him? My grandmother asked when she returned from Europe and found out about the rushed engagement. She looked worried, troubled in a way that made my chest hurt. It's a good match, I said, parroting Daniel's words because I didn't know what else to say. That's not what I asked, darling. But before I could answer, Daniel appeared with wedding folders and venue options, and suddenly grandmother was being swept up in planning mode, her concerns buried under floral arrangements and catering menus. My grandfather seemed less convinced, but he was dealing with some health issues by then, tired all the time, and Daniel had positioned himself as the one handling family business. Let me take care of this, grandfather, Daniel would say. You focus on feeling better. Susan's in good hands. The wedding was beautiful in the way funerals can be beautiful. Expensive flowers, elegant venue, guests who smiled and congratulated us while I stood in a white dress that cost more than some people's cars and felt absolutely nothing. I signed papers, so many papers. Daniel guided my hand to each line that needed a signature, explaining in that patient voice that this was standard. This was normal. This was just what marriage required. Prenuptial agreements, asset transfers, financial arrangements. The words blurred together and I signed everything because my brother was there telling me it was okay. It was all okay, and I still believed that he wouldn't hurt me. Marcus and I honeymooned in the Caribbean, 5 days in paradise where my new husband drank steadily from morning until night and barely spoke to me except to criticize. My dress was wrong. My hair was wrong. I smiled too much at the waiter, and what was I trying to do? Embarrass him. By the 3rd day, I called Daniel crying and he sighed like I was being dramatic. Marriage is an adjustment, Susan. Give it time. Marcus is a good man. You're probably just not used to someone having expectations of you. I wanted to ask what that meant, but Marcus walked in and I quickly ended the call. That night was the first time he got really drunk. The first time his voice turned into something ugly. The first time I saw that the man I'd married had a switch inside him, that alcohol flipped from cold indifference to hot rage. He didn't hit me that night, but he threw things, smashed a lamp against the wall, called me names I'd never been called before. And when I flinched away, terrified, he laughed and said, "What are you going to do? Call your brother? He's the one who sold you to me, sweetheart. No one's coming to save you." I told myself it was the alcohol talking, that this wasn't real, that when we got home, things would be better. They weren't. Marcus's house was a sprawling modern structure in an expensive neighborhood. All glass and sharp angles, beautiful and cold. He had staff, housekeepers, and a cook and a driver, but somehow I still felt completely alone. He'd leave for work before I woke up and come home late, already drunk or well on his way. Some nights he'd ignore me completely. Other nights he'd find fault with everything I did, everything I said, everything I was. I tried calling Daniel, tried explaining that this wasn't working, that I'd made a mistake. "You're just being emotional," he'd say. "Marriage is hard work, Susan. You can't just run away when things get difficult. What would grandfather think if you embarrassed the family like that?" So I stayed. I tried to be a good wife, whatever that meant. I learned Marcus's moods, learned how to stay quiet when the air felt dangerous, learned how to make myself small. The staff pitied me. I could see it in their eyes. But they needed their jobs, and I was just the latest Mrs. Chen, another young woman who'd married money and found misery. 6 months into the marriage, Marcus came home drunker than I'd ever seen him. I was in the bedroom reading, trying to ignore the sound of his stumbling footsteps on the stairs. He burst through the door, and I immediately stood up, my body knowing before my mind did that I needed to be ready to run. "You think you're so special," he slurred, advancing toward me. "You think your brother actually cares about you? Marcus, please, you're drunk. Let's talk in the morning when what? When I'm sober enough to pretend I can stand looking at you?" He laughed, mean and sharp. "Your brother warned me you'd be difficult, said you'd been spoiled, that you needed a firm hand." My blood ran cold. "What are you talking about?" "The deal, sweetheart. The beautiful deal where I got your trust fund and your brother got his freedom from babysitting his pathetic little sister." The room was spinning. "That's not... Daniel wouldn't he?" Marcus swayed, catching himself on the doorframe. "You signed everything over, Susan, every document, every transfer. You signed it all to me, and I signed half of it over to Daniel. That was our arrangement. I got a wife and $1 million. He got rid of you and got $1 million. Everyone wins. Well, except you." I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. "You're lying. My trust fund, it's supposed to be released when I turn 25. It's mine. My father left it for me, and you gave it all to me. Wedding papers, sweetheart. Buried in all that legal language your brother had you sign. Asset consolidation. Marital property agreements. You didn't even read them, did you? Just signed where your beloved big brother told you to sign. He was right. I hadn't read them. I'd trusted Daniel. I'd trusted the only family I thought I had left. My brother will send you to jail, I whispered, but the words sounded hollow even to me. When he finds out what you've done, Marcus laughed so hard he had to lean against the wall. Your brother already sold you. You were the price for your inheritance? Why do you think he pushed this marriage so hard? Why do you think he found me specifically? I needed capital. He needed you gone and access to your money. Everyone got what they wanted. He pushed off the wall and grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my skin hard enough to bruise. You signed it all away, Susan. Every penny. And you know what the best part is? When I'm done with you, when I've spent every last dollar, I can divorce you and you'll have nothing. No money, no family, no one who gives a damn whether you live or die. That night, I realized the truth that had been staring me in the face for years. I wasn't a wife. I wasn't a granddaughter. I wasn't even a person anymore. I was a transaction. A $2 million deal between my brother and a man who saw me as nothing more than a means to an end. Daniel hadn't been protecting me. He'd been positioning me, controlling me, making sure I was isolated and dependent and trusting enough to sign away everything my father had left me without asking a single question. I had been sold, and I had helped them do it. Marcus threw the folder at me, papers scattered across the marble floor of his study like broken promises. I was shaking so hard I could barely kneel to pick them up, but he grabbed my wrist before I could reach them. Read them, he hissed. Go ahead. See what you did? With trembling hands, I gathered the documents. Marriage certificate. Standard legal language about union and commitment. Then another page. Asset transfer agreement. My eyes scanned the words, trying to make sense of the legal terminology that swam before my vision. Grantor, beneficiary, irrevocable transfer. And there, at the bottom, clear as day, my signature. My thumbprint, a legal stamp I didn't remember seeing. The $2 million trust established by Victor Ashford, to be released upon Susan Ashford's 25th birthday, is hereby transferred in full to Daniel Ashford, with secondary beneficiary rights granted to Marcus Chen upon completion of marriage contract. I read it 3 times. 4, the words didn't change. I don't remember signing this. You signed it at the lawyer's office. 3 days before the wedding, your brother was there? He told you it was a standard prenuptial arrangement, remember? Protecting family assets. You signed 12 documents that day, Susan. This was buried in the middle. You didn't even ask what you were signing. You just trusted him. The room was tilting. I gripped the edge of his desk to stay upright. This can't be legal. I was coerced. I didn't understand what I was. You were 22 years old, a legal adult. You signed willingly in front of witnesses and a notary public. The trust was set to be released in 3 years, and you transferred it preemptively to your brother with your husband as secondary. All perfectly legal, all perfectly binding, all perfectly irreversible. I looked up at Marcus, at this man I'd been tied to through manipulation and lies, and I saw something flicker in his expression. Not quite sympathy, but close. Like he almost felt bad for what they'd done to me. Why? I whispered. Why would Daniel do this? Because he believed he deserved it more than you. Because your father's favoritism ate at him for years. Because your grandfather giving you equal shares felt like an insult. He told me all of it one night when we were celebrating the deal. Said you'd been handed everything your whole life, while he had to work for scraps of approval. Said the money should have been his from the start. I thought of every moment Daniel had called me spoiled, every comment about how easy I had it, every look of resentment hidden behind a caring smile. It had always been there. I'd just been too naive to see it. And you? My voice cracked. What did you get out of destroying my life? $500,000 up front to marry you? Another $500,000 once the trust transferred? The rest went to your brother, minus the lawyer's fees and various administrative costs. I needed the capital for a business venture. Your brother needed you out of the picture and access to the funds. It was just business. Susan? Nothing personal. Nothing personal. He'd married me, isolated me, abused me, and stolen my entire future. And it was nothing personal. I ran that night. I waited until Marcus passed out drunk in his study, until the night guards had settled into their patrol routine, until the house was as quiet as it would ever be. I took nothing but the clothes I was wearing and the wedding ring I'd later sell for $200 at a pawn shop. I climbed over the back wall, dropped into the alley behind the property, and ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out. I had no money. No phone, no identification. Marcus had kept all of that locked in his safe. Another form of control. I didn't even know where to go. I couldn't go to my grandparents because Daniel controlled access to them, controlled the narrative. If I showed up, He'd just spin some story about me being unstable, ungrateful, trying to manipulate them. And I had no proof, just my word against his. And my word had never been worth much in our family. I walked for hours through unfamiliar neighborhoods. As the night grew colder, around midnight, I collapsed on a roadside curb, sobbing so hard I thought I might break apart. A car slowed down. I tensed, terrified it might be Marcus's security. But it was just an older woman with kind eyes and a concerned expression. "Honey, are you okay? Do you need help?" I couldn't even answer. I just shook my head and kept crying. She sat with me on that curb for 20 minutes, not touching me, not pushing, just being present. Finally, she said, "There's a shelter about 3 miles from here. They take women in crisis, no questions asked. I volunteer there sometimes. Would you like a ride?" I nodded because I had nowhere else to go. The shelter became my home, St. Catherine's, house for women, rows of cots in a converted church basement, shared bathrooms, donated clothes, meals served cafeteria style 3 times a day. I stayed there for 3 months, numb and broken, barely speaking to anyone. The counselors tried to help, asked about my situation, but what could I say? That I'd been rich once? That my own brother had sold me? That I'd signed away millions of dollars without realizing it? It sounded insane even to me. Eventually, I moved to a different shelter across town, then another. I learned the system, the rules of survival when you have nothing. I learned which soup kitchens served the most food, which libraries would let you stay warm during the day without hassling you, which street corners were safe to sleep on when the shelters were full. I stopped looking like Susan Ashford. I became invisible, just another homeless woman that people stepped around on the sidewalk. 5 years passed like that. 5 years of disappearing into the cracks of the city, of becoming someone even I didn't recognize when I caught my reflection in store windows. I celebrated my 25th birthday alone on a park bench, the day my trust fund was supposed to be released. I wondered if Daniel had thrown himself a party, if he'd bought something expensive to commemorate stealing my entire future. I thought my family had forgotten I existed. I thought I'd become a ghost, erased from their history as efficiently as Daniel had erased me from my inheritance. I stopped hoping for rescue or reconciliation. I stopped believing in justice or fairness, or the idea that people who loved you wouldn't destroy you. And then came the charity camp. If this story is hitting different, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss what happens next. And drop a comment telling me if you saw that twist coming, because trust me, it only gets more intense from here. St. Catherine's organized it every year. Big event, lots of publicity, a chance for wealthy donors to feel good about themselves while the cameras rolled. They asked for volunteers from the shelter to help set up, and I agreed because it meant a hot meal and something to do. I was arranging donated coats on a table when I heard the commotion at the entrance. Town car, security detail, someone important arriving. I kept my head down, focused on folding a child's jacket. Rich people came to these things all the time. They never actually saw us. We were props in their charity production, nameless and faceless and temporary. But then the footsteps stopped, right behind me, and I heard that voice. That old, familiar voice I'd convinced myself I'd never hear again. Susan. My grandfather stood 5 feet away, his face drained of color, his expensive coat suddenly seeming ridiculous in the context of the shelter's humble space. His security guard hovered nearby, confused, while other donors and organizers started to notice the scene developing. But grandfather only had eyes for me. I couldn't hide, couldn't run, couldn't do anything but stand there in my donated clothes with my unwashed hair and my shaking hands, and watch my grandfather's heart break in real time. "It's me," I whispered. And then he was moving toward me, his arms wrapping around me, and I realized I was crying. We were both crying. Years of grief and loss and loneliness pouring out in the middle of a charity camp while strangers watched. "We searched for you," he kept saying. "We searched everywhere." "Your brother said. He said you'd run away. That you'd taken money from Marcus and disappeared. That you'd chosen this. We thought, God, Susan, we thought you'd abandon us." The lies. Of course there were lies. Daniel had probably crafted them carefully, made me look unstable or ungrateful or worse. Made sure our grandparents would be hurt enough, angry enough, that they wouldn't search too hard, that they'd eventually stop looking altogether. "Grandfather?" I managed. "Where's grandmother?" His face crumpled. "She passed away, sweetheart. 2 years ago? Her heart? She never stopped hoping you'd come back." The guilt crashed over me like a wave. I hadn't been there, hadn't said goodbye, hadn't even known she was sick. And she died thinking I'd abandoned her, thinking I'd chosen streets and shelters over family. "Come home," grandfather said. "Please. Whatever happened, whatever's wrong, we'll fix it. Just come home." The mansion looked exactly the same. Same iron gates, same circular driveway, same imposing facade that had once meant safety and love and belonging. But walking through those doors felt like entering a mausoleum. Everything was too quiet, too empty. Grandmother's portrait hung in the entrance hall, her kind eyes seeming to follow me as I walked past. The staff recognized me. I saw shock flash across their faces, whispered conversations in corners. How long had they been told I was gone by choice? What version of my story had Daniel spread through this house? Grandfather took me to his study, the same room where he'd once announced my trust fund. He poured himself a whiskey with shaking hands and sat down heavily in his leather chair. He'd aged so much. The powerful businessman I remembered had been worn down by grief and time and betrayal. "Tell me everything," he said. "Start from the beginning." So I did. The marriage Daniel had arranged, the papers I'd signed without understanding, the abuse, the discovery of the theft, my escape, the years on the streets. I laid out every ugly piece of the story while my grandfather's expression went from shock to horror to something cold and dangerous I'd never seen before. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. He didn't cry, didn't rage. Just sat there processing the truth that his grandson, the boy he'd helped raise, had systematically destroyed his granddaughter's life for money. "The trust," I said quietly. "Is there any way to it's gone?" His voice was flat. "Daniel accessed it the day you turned 25. Invested some, spent some, moved most of it into accounts I can't track. He's been telling me it was for family business expenses, showing me falsified documents, keeping me in the dark, while he robbed you blind. And Marcus divorced you in absentia last year, claimed abandonment. You never showed up to court because you didn't know about it, so it went through unopposed. He kept whatever assets he'd claimed in the marriage, probably splitting them with Daniel as originally agreed." I felt hollow. Not even angry anymore, just empty. Everything my father had tried to leave me, every protection he'd tried to put in place, all of it had been stripped away by the people who were supposed to love me. Grandfather stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the estate grounds. When he finally spoke again, his voice was steel. "I'm going to fix this, Susan. I'm going to make this right. There's nothing to fix. The money's gone. The marriage is Daniel won. We can't. I'm not talking about money." He turned to face me, and the expression on his face made me shiver. "I'm talking about justice. Real justice, the kind that hurts." He picked up his phone and dialed a number. Someone answered immediately, and my grandfather's voice became all business. "It's Victor Ashford. I need you to prepare documents. Full board meeting, emergency session, and pull every file we have on Daniel Ashford's business transactions for the past 5 years. Every transaction, every contract, every penny. I want to know where my grandson has been putting his hands, and I want to know by tomorrow morning." He wasn't going to confront Daniel. Wasn't going to have a family meeting or demand explanations. He was going to do something far more dangerous. He was going to use the full weight of his power, his connections, his business empire, to systematically take apart everything Daniel had built. And from the look on his face, he was going to enjoy every second of it. The emergency board meeting happened 3 days later. I wasn't invited, but I heard about it afterward from grandfather's longtime attorney, a sharp woman named Margaret Chen who'd been handling Ashford family business for 30 years. She came to the mansion specifically to brief me. Her expression a mixture of professional composure and barely contained satisfaction. "Your grandfather didn't waste time," she said, spreading documents across the dining table. He called every board member personally, told them there had been financial irregularities that required immediate attention. Daniel walked in thinking it was routine business. I could picture it. Daniel in his expensive suit, confident and composed, probably thinking he'd charmed his way into grandfather's full trust by now, probably believing he'd gotten away with everything. Victor presented a full audit of Daniel's activities over the past 5 years. Margaret continued, "Every questionable transaction, every inflated expense report, every kickback and underdatable deal. Your brother had been skimming from company accounts for years, Susan. Small amounts at first, then larger ones as he got bolder. He thought your grandfather was too old, too trusting, too grief-stricken to notice. What happened? The board voted unanimously to remove him from all positions within the company, effective immediately. No severance, no references. His access to family accounts was revoked. His company credit cards were canceled while he sat there. Victor made sure he left that building with nothing but the clothes on his back, and the understanding that if he ever tried to use the Ashford name for business again, there would be legal consequences. I should have felt triumphant, vindicated. Instead, I just felt tired. That's it. He stole $2 million from me and ruined 5 years of my life, and he just gets fired?" Margaret's smile was thin and sharp. "That's not all, but the rest comes later. Your grandfather is playing a longer game." Over the next 2 weeks, I started to understand what she meant. Grandfather didn't explode, didn't rage, didn't make dramatic announcements. Instead, he moved through his empire like a surgeon, cutting away Daniel's influence with precise, deliberate strokes. Business contacts who'd worked with Daniel received personal calls from Victor, quiet suggestions that perhaps other partnerships would be more reliable. Investments Daniel had made using his Ashford connections suddenly faced complications. Regulatory scrutiny, mysterious obstacles. Doors that had always opened for my brother because of our family name began closing, one after another. Until Daniel found himself isolated in a business world that ran on connections he no longer had. I learned all of this secondhand because Daniel never came to the mansion, never called, never tried to defend himself or apologize or explain. He simply vanished from our lives as thoroughly as he'd tried to make me vanish from his. One morning, about 3 weeks after the board meeting, Grandfather asked me to join him in his study. He looked stronger than he had since I'd returned, like having a purpose had rejuvenated him. He gestured for me to sit in the chair across from his desk, the same chair I'd sat in when I was 19, and he'd told me about the trust fund, the same chair where everything had started to fall apart. "I've been thinking about the future," he said, "about legacy, about what I'll leave behind when I'm gone." "Grandfather, you don't need to. I need to do this, Susan. I need you to hear this." He pulled out a leather folder, the expensive kind that held important documents. "I've had Margaret draft new estate documents, new business succession plans, new everything." He slid the folder across the desk. I opened it with trembling hands and started reading. Legal language, complex clauses, but the core message was crystal clear. Victor Ashford's entire estate, manufacturing plants, the real estate holdings, the investment portfolios, the businesses that had been built over 40 years, all of it was being left to me. Not split between grandchildren, not divided among family members. Just me. "This is everything," I whispered. "Grandfather, this is worth hundreds of millions of dollars." "I know." His voice was steady, certain. "You're my sole heir, Susan. The board has been notified. The legal documents are filed. When I die, everything I've built becomes yours." I couldn't breathe, couldn't process what this meant, but Daniel gets nothing. Not a penny, not a property, not a single share of stock. I've written him out completely. He'll fight this. He'll challenge it in court, claim you were manipulated, or let him try. Grandfather's smile was cold. I've included detailed documentation of his theft, his fraud, his systematic abuse of family resources. I've had 3 separate physicians certify my mental competence. I've recorded video testimony explaining exactly why I'm making these decisions. Daniel can spend whatever money he has left on lawyers, but he won't win. I've made absolutely certain of that. I stared at the documents, at my name written over and over in legal clauses and inheritance provisions. Susan Ashford, sole beneficiary, complete control. Everything my brother had schemed and manipulated and destroyed lives to obtain, I was being given freely. Not because I'd asked for it, not because I'd fought for it, but because I'd survived. "Why?" I asked. "Why give me all of this? I've been gone for 5 years. I'm not prepared to run a business empire. I don't know anything about you, know everything that matters." Grandfather leaned forward, his eyes intense. "You know what it's like to have nothing. You know what people at the bottom of society face every day. You have empathy, integrity, strength. Daniel had ambition and greed. I chose wrong before Susan. I thought grooming him for business would make him worthy of leading this family. Instead, it made him into someone who could sell his own sister for profit. I won't make that mistake again. I don't want revenge," I said quietly. "I don't want to become like him. This isn't revenge. This is justice. And more than that, it's opportunity. Take what I'm giving you and build something better. Use this wealth, this power, to help people the way you needed help. Transform the Ashford legacy into something that actually matters." He pulled out another document, smaller than the others. An envelope with Daniel's name written on it in my grandfather's distinctive handwriting. "I'm having this delivered to your brother today," Grandfather said. "I wanted you to know what it says." I opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper with just a few lines written in bold text. "Daniel, you stole $2 million from your sister. You sold her like property. You thought you'd won. But she will inherit hundreds of millions. Every business, every property, every account. Everything you tried to take, she now owns. You played a short game. I played the long one. Enjoy your victory. It cost you everything. Victor Ashford." I read it twice, 3 times. I imagined Daniel receiving this letter, opening it with whatever confidence he had left. Watching that confidence crumble as he understood what he'd lost. Not just money, not just business connections, but his entire future. Everything he'd schemed for, destroyed for, betrayed family, for, all of it gone to the sister he'd tried to erase. "He'll hate me," I said. "He already hates you." At least now he'll have a reason that reflects reality. The letter was delivered that afternoon. I don't know what Daniel did when he read it. I never spoke to him again. Over the following months, I heard rumors through the social networks that still connected our worlds. Daniel had taken a job with a mid-level company in another state. Nothing prestigious, nothing befitting in Ashford. He'd moved into a modest apartment, drove a used car, lived quietly and without the flash he'd always craved. Some people said he'd been humbled, others said he'd simply been beaten. I didn't care enough to find out which was true. Grandfather spent the next year teaching me everything he could about running the business. Long days in his study going over financial reports, strategic plans, industry contacts. He introduced me to key players as his heir, watching their reactions, carefully making note of who treated me with respect and who looked at me like I was a diversity hire playing dress-up. Those who dismissed me found their contracts not renewed. Those who gave me a chance found new opportunities opening up. Slowly, I stopped being Victor Ashford's traumatized granddaughter and started becoming Susan Ashford, businesswoman, leader, someone who belonged in boardrooms and negotiations. Grandfather passed away 2 years after I came back. Peacefully in his sleep at 84, the will reading was exactly what he'd promised, everything to me. Daniel wasn't even mentioned except in a clause specifically stating he was being deliberately excluded. He didn't attend the funeral. I heard he'd sent a card, something generic and impersonal that could have been addressed to anyone. I threw it away without reading it. At 29 years old, I became one of the wealthiest women in the state. It was terrifying, overwhelming. Some days I still felt like the homeless woman standing in a food line, and I'd look around my grandfather's office, my office neon, wonder if I was dreaming. But then I'd remember why I was here. Remember the shelters and the streets and the absolute powerlessness of having nothing. Remember every woman I'd met who'd been thrown away by families or husbands or systems that didn't care if they lived or died. The first thing I did with my inheritance was establish a foundation, the Alina Ashford Foundation, named after my mother, dedicated to helping women escape domestic violence and financial abuse. We funded shelters, legal aid clinics, job training programs, emergency housing. Every woman who walked through our doors got the help I desperately needed and barely received. We didn't ask questions, didn't judge, just offered a hand up and the resources to rebuild. The second thing I did was transform how Ashford Industries operated. We implemented strict ethical guidelines, third-party audits, transparent reporting, fair wages throughout the supply chain. It cost us some profit margins, but it bought us something more valuable in the company my grandfather built on ambition. I was rebuilding on principle. Today, I sit in an office I once would have cleaned floors to reach. Corner suite on the 42nd floor, floor 2 ceiling windows overlooking the city that had nearly swallowed me whole. I run a multinational company worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I employ thousands of people. I make decisions that affect entire industries. And every single day I remember what it felt like to be invisible, to be powerless, to be erased. St. Catherine's House, the shelter that first took me in, now operates in a building I purchased and renovated. The Ashford Foundation covers their entire operating budget. The woman who stopped on that roadside years ago and offered me a ride, I found her. She's now the director of our outreach programs, using her kindness as a template for how we approach everyone who needs help. I still see Marcus Chen sometimes at industry events. He's remarried to someone younger and wealthier than I ever was. We don't speak. Once, across a crowded gala, our eyes met and I saw something flicker in his expression. Regret maybe. Or just the realization that he'd sold his integrity for $500,000 and a business deal that ultimately failed. While I'd risen from nothing to everything. He looked away first. Last month, I received a letter. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting. Daniel's. I almost threw it away unopened. But curiosity won out. Inside was a single page, his words cramped and desperate. Suzanne, I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know what I did was unforgivable, but we're family. We're all each other has left. I'm struggling. I lost my job. I'm about to lose my apartment. I need help. Just enough to get back on my feet. For Dad's memory? For the family we used to be? Please, I read it once. Then I folded it carefully, placed it back in the envelope, and filed it away in a drawer I'd labeled closed chapters. I didn't send money, didn't send a response, just let the silence speak for itself, the way my silence had spoken when I was homeless and desperate and he was counting his stolen millions. Some people said I should help him, that family means forgiveness, that holding grudges only hurts yourself, that I'd become wealthy enough to afford generosity. But they didn't understand. This wasn't about revenge or bitterness or holding on to anger. This was about consequences. About allowing Daniel to finally experience the helplessness and fear and desperation he'd engineered for me, about letting him understand, viscerally and completely, what it means to be abandoned by the people who should protect you. I didn't win because I was smarter than Daniel or stronger than Marcus or luckier than the thousands of other women who end up on streets and in shelters. I won because I survived. Because I refused to disappear completely, even when every system and person in my life was designed to erase me. Because somewhere deep down, beneath all the trauma and betrayal and loss, I still believed I deserved to exist. The Ashford name used to mean power built on ambition and wealth, accumulated through ruthless business practices. Now it means something different. It means second chances, fair treatment, the understanding that every person has value, regardless of what they own or where they've been. My grandfather gave me an empire, but I'm building a legacy. They tried to erase me, my brother, my husband. The systems that treat homeless people like they're invisible. They tried to make me disappear, to become just another tragic story. Another woman who had everything and lost it all. They wanted me gone, but blood doesn't disappear. Blood survives. Blood remembers. And blood always finds its way back. I'm Susan Ashford. I spent 5 years homeless. And now I own everything they tried to take from me. Not because I was owed it. Not because I demanded it. But because I lived through what should have destroyed me. And I turned survival into something more powerful than revenge could ever. I turned it into proof that they were wrong about me, and I wake up every single day knowing that's a victory worth more than any amount of money Daniel could have stolen. If you've ever felt betrayed by the people you trusted most, drop a heart below. And if you believe that survival is the greatest revenge, hit subscribe, because every story here proves that the ones who tried to break us never saw us rising.